Welcome to Life by Design. I'm your host, Robyne, and I am thrilled to welcome you to this space for real conversations about how we live, how we show up day in and day out, because the quality of our life is shaped by our habits. What we do in ordinary time allows us to be extraordinary. We can unpack what it takes to truly live well and be well in real life. Welcome to Life by Design. And I'm just so excited that you're here. Welcome to Life by Design. Today is, I can say this with full confidence, one of the most special conversations I have ever had in my entire life. I had the opportunity to talk with Ernest Hillen. Now, he is a gentleman who just celebrated his 92nd birthday. Yes, 92 years old. He also happens to be a survivor of an internment camp during the Second World War as a 7-year-old boy with his mother and separated from his father and subsequently his brother. Ernest is the absolute epitaph of resiliency. It is the most important interview I feel like I have ever had on this podcast. I'm so excited to share it with you. I hope you enjoy hearing from Ernest, learning from Ernest, and just how special it is to keep telling our stories. Well, hello, Mr. Hillen, and welcome to our interview today. I'm very excited that you're here.
Well, me too.
So, Mr. Hillen, I remember sitting in a restaurant with your daughter, Maya, and your son-in-law, Mikey, and we were talking about books. And Maya said, my father has written some books, and I was very fascinated to talk to a fellow author. And Maya showed me on her phone the titles of your books. And I was just in that moment so awe-inspired that you had written these books, and being able to have a conversation with you today is so very special. So thank you for making time for this.
Oh, yes. Well, I'm looking forward to it.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah.
There's not many people who have written their stories about what it was like growing up and having a childhood like you did, and your journey to Canada, which is in itself very extraordinary. And would you share with us just a little bit of insight into your story? I know there's so many parts and so many chapters, parts that you would like to share with us to get an understanding of who Mr. Hillen is and how you came to Canada.
In the beginning, when I was little, in the first book, there was a terribly important person always there, my mother. And she was never in the way. Parents can be in the way, you know.
Yes.
She wasn't. She was there. She was there if you needed her. She was there if you were in trouble or in pain, and she was always there for me because I loved telling stories, and she was ready for them. And we found since very early on, 3 or 4 years old, she'd find time to sit usually on her bed and listen to me go on and on. It's a fantastic audience, and not too much comment, just enjoying the silly little story that I had for her. And that went on every day. It was always there.
What a special gift. And those stories that she listened to and that you shared, in your book, you talk about how you and your mother were together in an internment camp during the Second World War. And even in those moments at nighttime, she would hold space for you to share your stories and to keep you safe, keep you protected for 3.5 years in an internment camp.
My brother was with us halfway.
Yes.
And then he was taken away. He became a danger to the state. and but he landed by good fortune in the same camp as my father. There were many of these camps, but they were always divided, men and women. And he landed in my father's camp, and so he survived in a sense well too.
Yes.
We were extremely lucky. This coincidence that us kids were with them,
Yes.
and very lucky. It had a lot to do with survival.
One of the things that I just admired so much in your writing when you talk about your relationship with your mother is your mother's perspective on how she wanted you to be true to yourself, you to know who you were, and also how it almost seemed like she would always be, in her words, up for an adventure, that she was just able to take life as it was, and she was able to make the best of some of the most unbelievable circumstances.
Yes, she did. She did,
Yeah.
and she was a very simple person. She wasn't a worldly person or a very educated person. She'd gone to school to become a public school teacher. Um, but she was not in the least bit sophisticated, and yet as the time went on and I understood things better, I realized that she was extremely wise.
Yes.
And really unusually wise. And it came from Lord knows where. She was the guiding light. She saved us.
Yes. And what I thought was just so remarkable in part of your mother's story is that she was a Canadian, that she was a Canadian who married a foreigner, which I thought was so sweet when your story you recounted when you were in London and you were living or staying in the home for war wives or bride wives. And your mother still maintained this sense of humor about look what happens when you marry a foreigner. So my understanding is that she had been out of Canada for many years. She'd married your father, came to Holland, and then you moved on to. My understanding is you moved on to a plantation in Indonesia, is where you were first living.
She came to Holland, of course, couldn't speak a word of Dutch. My father settled into a tiny village where nobody spoke English then in those days. And he started a chicken farm. And life was kind of tough for her.
Of course.
Her life in Canada had been very sheltered, and suddenly she was on her own, having to cope with the new husband, and then suddenly one son, and then a second son. But she got through it, and then after some years, my father didn't do well finding work in Holland, so what happened then in those days was that you immigrated to Indonesia. There was always work there, and he did extremely well on the plantation, and she, of course, followed him a little while later and adjusted to that very extraordinary life on the plantation.
Yes.
And then, of course, came the camps, and there was a terrible strength to her. She really was not a very big woman, but a very powerful one.
Very much so. And as you share in your books, how your mom was able to look after you and your brother in those circumstances. And as you said, it sounds just so wise in terms of encouraging you how to navigate that, how to essentially behave and how to carry yourself in those situations, how to stay calm.
Yeah.
That was just so remarkable that your mother was able to share perspective and that insight with you.
And I, of course, it was only years later that I recognized how tough it all must have been for her. But I think I've shown afterwards, I'm glad of that, that I did recognize it and appreciated it and valued it. And yeah, we became eventually also very good friends.
That's so beautiful. When I think about your mother's strength and her courage, what I really appreciate is that she was in such an uncertain, such a scary, uncertain situation. So much was outside of her control, but your mother was able to do things that gave her that sense of taking care of herself. And even the story that you share about her saving her dress that she would wear when she left the camp, the green dress, like, I just think that is just so special how, and how she would, where she would find moments of joy, even in these very, very difficult places. Your mother was truly extraordinary.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
The one thing that I've always later appreciated was that she was also very determined about certain things. She could not break the rules in that respect, in staying herself and
Yes.
keeping her energy. And for example, she all through the camps at 4 o'clock, if she was back from work at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, she had tea. Well, lots of time went by that there was no tea. Well, she had hot water, and she would drink that cup of hot water very quietly, and we had better be out of the road. She didn't want to see us for a while.
Yes.
And she made that throughout the camps. She would say, "I need time for myself."
Yes.
And I would go out and play, do whatever you want. I don't want to see you for the next hour. I mean, that's how she talked too.
Yes.
And we obeyed that, and I think that gave her enormous help in retaining her strength. Yeah.
Yeah. Holding on to being true to herself, true to her customs, true to her identity. And I very much appreciate how, as you said, she was almost like tiny, but very mighty and strong in her beliefs. And especially as, I think so often when we hear stories of just heroics, I think sometimes there's this misconception that we are quote unquote rescued or liberated, and then everything is relatively like easy there on out. And what I see in your books and hear in the stories is that even after you were liberated from these camps, the process of coming to Canada, your mother had to fight and advocate so hard, especially when you arrived in London and there were these miscommunications about whether or not she was a British citizen or under the care of British, in terms of who was responsible for what they called displaced persons. And I loved in your story how your mother so boldly said, "I am not a displaced person. Neither are my boys. We are Canadians."
She was very patient with the world and with us and with her friends and my father, but she always had her limits. And even the authorities in London, they had their limits. "I'm not a DP." Yeah.
Yeah.
The hell with you.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. And again, I just appreciate, the amount of times your family had to start over and try again, and coming to Canada, and what that must have been like for you as a young boy coming to Canada after everything that you had survived and navigated, and even just the journeys on the ships and the trains and the planes. And now all of a sudden, little Ernest is in Canada. And tell us a little bit about that season for you and your family.
Well, I had to become a Canadian boy. I had to forget all the stuff that had happened. It wasn't very interesting. I had to learn to wear gabardine pants. Adjust to being a Canadian boy, not even a Dutch boy. I knew how to be a Dutch boy a little bit. We weren't bad kids, my brother and I, but we'd been on so independent for so long, even though I lived with my mother, of course, all that time, but I didn't see her most of the day. I was on my own.
Because she
And
was working in the camps. They were the women were at working.
she was always working, and they worked them very hard. and they'd be very tired when they came home.
Of course.
She let me be. She let me find my own way. There was guidance always, but I almost had to ask for it.
Mm-hmm.
She wanted me to grow up and adjust, and I did, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, you absolutely did. And again, I just think it's so remarkable how your mother's perspective and how she carried herself, and even saying to you that, the war is behind us. Now we go forward, that we don't revisit that. We don't need to revisit that. We go
No,
forward. Just the strength of her to be able to look
exactly.
forward and onward is quite remarkable. And Ernest, working with so many people now that I work with, families and groups and organizations, there seems that some of that might feel lost in terms of people knowing how to move forward, people knowing how to make do with what they have. And that must be a big extreme, I would imagine, for you to see what your family's experience, what your experiences are, and what the world very much looks like today and looks like now, and how people show up and how people are living their lives right now.
I think you have certain principles
Yes.
that are in you and that you exercise and use them automatically. You
Yeah.
turn to them. One aspect of it was that I can't have pity
Yes.
for me.
Yeah.
Self pity is I don't have it,
Mhm.
or if I feel it's coming up, I immediately try to squelch it.
Yes.
I always look at the good side of something,
Yes.
or the silly side of it, or
Yeah.
whatever. As of today, we're in a mad world. We're
Yes.
in the beginning of the Second World War.
Mhm.
It's so awfully dangerous,
Yes.
uh, and as an individual without any power, how do you cope with it? No,
Mhm.
you cope with it. You try to understand it, get
Yes.
mad,
Hmm.
um,
Yeah.
but there is, of course, very little that most of us can do
Yes.
except keep on living with the strength that you have and the humor that you have.
Yeah. And the principle, right? I hear you say that you again, similar to the wisdom of your mother, is you stay true to who you are, what you
Yeah,
believe.
yeah,
And again, I also appreciate that, we do get mad, because it's not that we say this is okay, because it's not okay. It's okay that we can be upset with the way that people are way that people are behaving right now, or how power is being misused. Absolutely. Now, one of the things that I find, as somebody who studies resiliency, and again, as I shared with you before we hit record, I still feel so nervous, because you are such a wise person who has lived an extraordinary life. When I started to do this scholarship, this research, we identified that there were 5 areas that we saw people from many different backgrounds and circumstances. There were these 5 areas that we saw made the biggest difference. And something that happened to me while I was reading your book is the 5 pillars that we talk about, they are all the way through your story. And I just want to share with you how significant that is to me, as somebody who does this work, that and again, to give you an example, we talk about the power of belonging, that this is so important, that we have our family systems, or we are providing or protecting our families, and that allows us to stay strong. It allows us to do hard things and be brave. And we also talk about the importance of perspective, how your mom would share with you that, this is another adventure, like we are going to figure this out, and that this is behind us now, and what's within our control is how we move forward. And the theory we built also talks about acceptance, that we work with our things that are in our control, and there's going to be things outside of our control. We also talk about the power of hope, And in the story, even sharing how you didn't wear your friend's boots when you were liberated, but you had those boots in your mother's dress, and singing Christmas carols, and all of these little micro doses of hope. And the fifth variable, Ernest, is humor. It's this idea of, finding these little bright spots even in the darkest moments. And I can share with you that your story, it feels like it's putting just this deep, deep reverence and validity to this work that we do about resiliency. So I want to say thank you. Thank you for sharing your story, and thank you for letting me look at your story through the lens in which I study resiliency. And the thread I would love to pull is that piece about humor, because you are funny. Your stories, your recounting of your time on the ship with the soldiers, your experiences in these rural classrooms in Canada. Tell me, how can someone maintain that humor even when there are so many hard parts in our everyday life? How were you, where did the humor come from? How do we still hold humor?
I guess I'm a little bit of a storyteller.
Yes.
I like telling stories.
Yeah.
And I think that I'm on the right road to answering you.
Yes.
I think that in the telling of stories, I always automatically bring in humor of some kind in the description of the hero. Mm-hmm. I was a journalist here in Canada, and I wrote magazine stories. Mm-hmm. And I read them now and then because they're not bad. They're 50 years old, but they're fairly good. Yeah. And there's always a little element of humor, or even if it's a little sarcasm, but there is always that in there, and it's automatic.
Ernest, what is some of your, or one of your favorite stories that you like to tell? Do you have a favorite or one of the favorite stories that you like to share?
I wrote in the past, you mean?
Yeah, that you wrote in the past, or just a little anecdote that you like to share. Maybe you'd like to share it today with the folks who are listening.
I was going to say that watching children, and I'm privileged. I have Maya's and Michael's sweet kids here at home. Mm-hmm. That I don't know if this answers you, but I can sit and watch them, and they're so funny.
Yes. Yes.
And they don't mean to be. They're not trying to be funny. Yeah. They're just so amusing how they're singing as they're playing with their dolls. Yes. And they're in a world that's all their own. Yes. And it's for the outsider observing it. Mm-hmm. It's funny. It's
joy.
It's just funny and sweet.
Yeah. I love that.
And kids have that.
They sure do.
At one point, I suddenly think of it, but we at the magazine where I worked, Weekend Magazine. You were still a child at the time of Weekend Magazine. We got a letter from a little girl. I think she was 13, saying, somebody should do a story on a big family. Somebody should come and visit us. And I've forgotten how many there were. I think 11 or 12.
Wow.
This was in Montreal, and I somehow the letter drifted to my little office, and I thought, Jesus, that's a wonderful invitation. That's great. I'll go. And I did a story of them, and the story, I hope, is filled with how amusing they are. So that's what I'm saying, that young people are funny and sweet and amusing. Yeah.
Yes. Oh, I love that. And I love that that a little one would write into the magazine for wanting to read a story about her family. I think that's special. Yeah. That's so beautiful. And I see behind you, there are so many books. You have so many books behind you. And as a journalist and a storyteller, what are some of your favorite books that you've come across? Or do you have books that you like to revisit or reread? Or are there any titles of books that are really special?
Aldous Huxley is a big favorite of mine. He's easing off now.
Yes.
because he's been dead for quite a while, and yeah, he's one of my biggest favorites. I read him when I was very young. I began reading him.
Yes.
And shall I tell you a little anecdote about him?
I would love, absolutely, please do.
Okay. You know, the weekend that JFK died, the president.
Yes, in Dallas.
In that same weekend, Aldous Huxley died.
Oh.
But of course, we didn't hear about it because blackout for news. There was nothing else but the death of the president. But about 2 weeks later, I was living in Montreal. 2 weeks later, in the Montreal Star, there came a column by a British writer who wrote occasionally. You couldn't count on him. He just once in a while when he had something interesting to say, and usually it was about writers. Very often interviews with writers. And at the beginning of that weekend, he had an appointment with Mr. Huxley, who was then very sick. He was not very old. He was in his late 60s, I think. And Huxley lay on his bed. He couldn't sit up for some reason, but couldn't stop writing. And he had children's scribblers.
Wow.
And with a pencil.
Yeah.
The word James Joyce did the same thing, by the way, in his life. And it's the need and the drive to want to write must be so immense.
Wow. For
people like that. Anyhow, he interviewed Huxley and said, "Sir, you're at the peak of your fame. You can't get more famous than Aldous Huxley. When you go to India, you stay with Mr. Nehru, the prime minister. It's your level of friendships with the most accomplished men and women in the world." He'd asked them a bunch of questions from work habits and so on beforehand. This was sort of the last question. And he said, "Have you a little bit of advice for us?" And Huxley lay there, and Huxley finally said, "Be a little kinder."
Oh, that's very special.
I thought you'd like that.
I would. Yeah. I very much do. Now, Ernest, when I have the opportunity to interview people, I have a question that I'd like to end on. And the question that I would end on with you, if it's okay, is to ask you, as somebody, because I study hope right now, what is something today that Ernest is hoping for?
Oh, wow.
What is something in your heart that you're hoping for? Because I believe we all are hoping for something, and I would love to know what you're hoping for.
My grandson is 7, going on 8. And the other day, I had a reason for. He was looking at my hand and my fingers and playing with them, and I said, "Have you seen this scar?" And I told him very briefly the story of the scar. And he liked it. He liked the story. And I think what I'm really looking forward to, hoping for, is that sooner rather than later, Sam, that I can read from my little book to Sam.
Yes.
That would make me very happy.
Oh, Ernest, I'm hoping for you. I think that's so special. Yeah.
My daughter.
May I just hop in just for one?
Hi, Maya. Oh, there's always room for you, sister. It's beautiful to see you, Maya.
Just on the subject of our son, been so, it's so special to have these books as, getting to know my father and my grandmother and our family history and rereading them again as a mother to a 7-year-old boy, which was my dad's age, in the camp. And I also have a 5-year-old daughter. And to just from a mother, see how my grandma handled that, and to imagine if I had to go through it. They're riding on trains or carts to the camps, and it's like a 2-day standing room only ride, no water, no food. And I think I leave the house for 15 minutes and I have water and snacks.
Oh,
and
of course.
And to have to not be able to give your children what they need. But how amazingly my grandma did it and handled it with such courage and grace and humor. And there's a scene in the book where she's teaching them how to bow. They had to bow every morning to the commandants, and they end up doing it. They practiced, and they all end up just falling on the mattress laughing because they're doing it and making everything an adventure and making them not scared, cautious, but not scared. And anyways. Yeah. And also one more thing, how resilient children are in and of themselves.
Yes.
They're amazingly resilient.
Absolutely. Yes. And I appreciate you sharing that. And also just that, again, understanding, looking at that through a mother's lens, with Sam being the same age as your father was in those circumstances, and just knowing your grandmother is they're all still part of your family story, and just how marvelous it is and special and courageous, and that the stories of women like your grandmother and Ernest like your mother, that those stories are not going to be lost. But to hold space, that the stories of brave women like your mother and like your father and your family and your friends, that we have I believe, a responsibility to keep telling those stories and sharing those stories. And that's why I was just so awe-inspired when Maya, again, casually sitting next to me at a table at a restaurant, said, my father has written books, and brought us into this moment where we can have this conversation today, Ernest. And I am so grateful. My heart is full. It is smiling from the inside out. I celebrate you and your family and your story, and the beautiful daughter you have raised, and those beautiful grandchildren. That is all the legacy of your family. And I'm just so appreciative that you shared part of your story with us today. Thank you.
Wow. What a splendid person you are.
Thank you. Thank you for spending time with me on this episode of Life by Design. I appreciate if you have a moment to pay this forward, share it with someone who you think might benefit from the ideas shared in this episode. If you're feeling so inspired, please also rate and review the podcast wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Again, thank you for listening. Thank you for your time. Take good care, and I'll see you next time.